really curious to get your perspective on what some big misconceptions are about sales today.
Yeah, I think that there's two ends of a spectrum, and people think is in very binary terms. They're thinking it's either this or that, and it's either, well, selling is being salesy, or in the online side of things, it's maybe we just give lots of value, and mystically it all just works out somehow, and I don't have to be cringe. And what we need to consider is that it's not about there being a middle ground, because that suggests a hybrid of the two. What I'd like to call it is a third way, which is a bit more elegance and a bit more thought for the state of the person you're speaking to. And I do feel that sales has a bad reputation because it's an incredibly low barrier to entry to do sales, not necessarily successfully, but to ask someone for a thing is a very low, like very accessible thing to do. And the problem is, because of the sheer volume of people doing that, you end up with ill-trained approaches, let's call it. And you end up with people, of course, annoying humans. And I think what's so fascinating is that we're all, by the time we're adults, certainly even before, masters of the art of communication and interaction and the nuance of how we begin meeting a new person. And yet we throw it all away because we have the wrong kind of agenda when we attempt to acquire a new customer. And the kind of the wrap the whole of this talk up in one is you just do it the way the buyer wants to buy as opposed to the way the seller wants to sell, and you're golden. But it's just typically not something that's done. And I really want, it's like a bit of a crusade for me, Michael, to fix that.
And I love that, being somebody who, admittedly, I go into almost every conversation with that little bit of like, when I know somebody on the other end has something to sell, with that apprehension, here, car salesman is usually what people would, think about with it. Because look, anybody who says I'm not worried about selling a car, you're like, you're on commission. I know you're worried about, selling a car. It does become that, automatic. I mean, it's also their scarlet letter to wear, because at the same time, look, they're also like, no, I'm trying to help you find a vehicle that is going to get you what you need, which is true.
Yeah.
But people have this, again, apprehension around it. And so I'm curious, though, for you, when you talk about that and approaching it, and there's this level of like integrity with it, and actually what you had said about value, I'm like, dang, I've fallen in that too, because I'm like, just keep bringing more value. And I think because it's such a tactic now that everybody knows too, it's kind of like, okay, I know what's going on here. I'll give you my email. You'll give me a few things valuable in exchange, probably one more than I asked for. So how do you approach that today without it feeling like you're just one of the other salespeople?
Yeah, we have to be really careful, because the mainstream, let's talk, if we're online, for instance, the mainstream narrative is just give lots of value and it will all work out. And I think it's very dangerous and the source of a lot of misery, because just giving value basically is easy, but it's also safe, and it allows you to hide in amongst lovely platitudes and nice posts that make people feel like you're being helpful. And it feels like work because it's relevant. So it allows you to excuse yourself from actually trying to nurture people. And I suppose where I'm trying to go with this is that it's that the approach needs to be one of, okay, let's look at what attracting someone looks like.
Yeah.
And in starting this relationship in the right way looks like. So you mentioned you use car salesperson, for instance, and we will understand ultimately everyone's here to acquire customers. The reason you're doing this podcast ultimately maps to that. The reason why I'm a guest on it ultimately maps to that. But the way we need to approach it is engaging with someone about their line of work and what they are doing with a view to then moving to a sale is none of your business until you've earned the emotional right for it to be any of your business with them.
That's a great way to look at it.
And what that starts with is building some trust with them. And trust comes from either familiarity in the form of seeing you lots, saying content or whatever, or you saying things that make them feel assured that you're not going to be awkward or difficult to be around. Selling is okay as long as you do it in a way that's received in the right way. And I'll try and be really clear with this. What I mean is, for every moment in the interaction, you need to interact according to the state of that person. And if that person is a cold, passive passerby, then you need to act accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're a hot, active, interested person, then you act accordingly. Because at the other end of the spectrum, you get people who are really, really keen, knocking on your door. And I've seen a lot of companies that I've helped with this. They're throwing deals because they don't know how to handle someone in that state either.
Yeah.
And I think an awareness for where they are is really crucial, as opposed to, this is probably, it's kind of the big thing, is like, as opposed to an awareness of where you want them to be, if that makes sense. And
Sure.
there's a lot of entitlement inadvertently when people ask someone for something immediately, when actually we should consider, are we asking a bit too much for the state of this relationship?